The Hillman Imp is a car of contradictions. While it sported a cutting-edge aluminium engine with a motorsports pedigree, it was mounted at the back when the rest of the car industry was moving to front-wheel drive. It was built in a brand new facility with the latest machinery, but hundreds of miles away from its suppliers. This all produced a car that was modern yet outdated. Why did Rootes Group, a car company with a long history of making conservative, reliable cars in the heart of the car-producing Midlands, decide to make their first economy car near Glasgow? This is the Hillman Imp story. The Suez Canal in Egypt is one of the modern wonders of the world, rivaling the pyramids of Giza just up the road. Dug between 1859 and 1869, it's over 120 miles long, connecting the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea, meaning ships don't have to sail around the tip of Africa to get from Europe to the east, shaving 10 days and a mammoth 5,500 miles off the journey time. By the 20th century, it was owned and operated by the Egyptian government and a group of mostly British and French investors. So it came as quite a shock to the world when Egyptian President Nasser decided to nationalise it in 1956, essentially holding the world's shipping hostage, being able to charge any price he wanted for passage or to deny passage to countries or companies he didn't like. This sent the world, and particularly Europe, into a panic. It led to a bungled British-led attempt to recapture it, which led to a pipeline supplying 20% of British oil being blown up. Petrol was rationed, something previously seen in the Second World War, and this led to a rush to cars that used less of that precious Middle Eastern oil that was having to travel around Africa. Car companies took notice, with BMC starting work on the Morris Mini Minor. Rootes Group, makers of Hillmans, Humbers, Sunbeams and Singers, actually started work on their own fuel-efficient Super Mini a year before the Suez Crisis, simply to fill a gap in their lineup. The project was instigated by Mike Parks and Tim Fry. Their car needed to seat 2 adults and 2 kids, get to 60 miles an hour yet return 60 miles per gallon, and to be fun to drive. The initial proposal was affectionately, or maybe not so affectionately, known as the Slug, with a rounded shape inspired by Continental bubble cars. The low-mounted 2-cylinder engine was put at the back of the car for simple economics. The constant velocity joint needed for front-wheel drive cars was considered too expensive. In any case, rear-wheel drive cars were a popular choice in Europe, and there would be plenty of space up front to store your stuff. Management weren't exactly clamouring for this to be produced though. They tried a small economy car twice before in the 30s and the 40s and had abandoned the idea. They didn't like the Slug's bubble shape either, with the boss, Lord Rootes, refusing to even ride in it. But the Suez Crisis focused everyone's minds. The car was approved as Project Apex, just so long as it could have a more traditional shape, something that would complement the rest of their lineup. That 2-cylinder engine would have to go as well. Rootes cars had more power than that, so the team started searching for a suitable 4-cylinder engine. They found it in an unlikely source. Rootes needed something lightweight, compact yet powerful. The company Coventry Climax had created the FW or featherweight engine in 1950 in response to a government order for lightweight yet powerful pumps for the fire service. By making much of it out of aluminium, it had been a hit, offering more power per pound than many existing engines. Soon motorsports teams were knocking on their door, and 2 engines joined together to make a V8 would power Jim Clark to his 2 Formula One World Championships. This was the ideal compact engine for Project Apex. The bubble shape was ditched initially for a basic 3-box design, but it needed to be a little bit more interesting than that. Project Apex's new look would be influenced by large American cars, shrank down to a pint-sized package of course. It seemed to be influenced by the Chevrolet Corvair. They weren't the only European car company to be thinking along those lines. The NSU Prince, updated in 1961, had a very similar look. This cool American styling would hopefully win over younger drivers who needed inexpensive transport. Coventry Climax supplied a 39 horsepower 875cc engine. but the gearbox would prove to be trickier. Those used in motorsports were overkill and not designed for years of use and abuse. Roots had no choice but to design their own. The result was a compact yet reliable gearbox with full synchromesh, something that Mini designer Alec Izagonis said was impossible in such a compact package. But no one was talking about synchromesh in 1959 when BMC launched the Mini. Where Roots had chosen a rear-engine car for simplicity, the Mini put the engine up front in a compact arrangement that produced a car much smaller and lighter than Project Apex. There must have been some very worried faces in Roots' office the day the Mini broke cover. Their rear-engine arrangement suddenly looked out of step, especially as British drivers weren't keen on having the boot up front. But they felt changing the layout wasn't an option, even if it meant the car would be out of date even before it launched. Roots had been working on their car for 4 years, and to change now would mean throwing away so much work and delaying the car further. They needed to get the car to market as soon as possible, especially as the Mini was proving there was a market for small economical cars. The UK economy was booming, so having a car to sell was more important than having something that was better than the Mini. In any case, there was still so much work to do, including picking a factory where it would be made. Roots' home was Coventry, and they favoured building a new factory right there. But in the 1960s, it was the government that told companies where to invest, and thought it made much more sense, at least for them, to locate the factory 320 miles away in Linwood near Glasgow. It made sense for the government, where ex-shipbuilders were searching for jobs, especially with 2 local steel factories to supply it, but it wasn't Roots' first choice. But the government grants sweetened the deal. Back in the Midlands, development had been starved, but with the Mini selling well, Roots threw money at the project to get it out the door. Rear-engine cars want to oversteer, so relatively expensive semi-trailing arm independent rear suspension had to be used, further increasing the cost. Work on the gearbox was coming along nicely, but features like the automatic choke and pneumatic throttle were rushed out without enough testing. That lightweight Coventry Climax engine was having problems as well. The original goal was to have 3 engines, 800cc, 875cc and 998cc. But the weight of the new car, being 145 kilograms heavier than the Mini, made the 800cc engine impractical. And with the 998cc engine proving unreliable, it was decided to only offer the 875cc version, at least at launch. The Mini would be available in engine sizes from 875cc's all the way up to 1.3 litres, giving the customer many more options. The motor industry knew Roots were making a car up at Linwood, but they didn't know what it would look like until the news leaked a year before launch. They even learnt the name, the Hillman Imp. The launch date was set for May 1963, much sooner than the development team wanted, which meant work fixing the Gremlins was thrown into high gear. Between 1961 and 1963, the reliability team drove the car through Europe to baking Kenya and frigid Canada to give it the toughest conditions. Roots roped in anyone with a pulse to drive the cars in the UK, including kids who'd only just got their driving licenses. They got up to various shenanigans, including crashing into a steamroller and a lorry. Up in Linwood, the factory was also behind schedule, and houses were being thrown up as fast as possible for future workers, antagonising the existing community. Everything was being rushed, both the testing and the production, which would lead to problems down the road. But Roots wasn't scrimping on the factory. It used the latest tooling to achieve a high rate of production. There were hopes of producing 150,000 cars every year, exporting half of them around the world. The Hillman Imp launched with a big splash, and with the Duke of Edinburgh opening the Linwood factory.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to declare this, whatever it is, open. Press the button.
What he didn't know was the factory was only half finished, and the Imp had been rushed through testing. The Imp he drove was one of a handful that had been finished. It had taken 8 years to launch, an eternity in car design, and even though design work had started before the Mini, it launched 4 years later when the Mini was riding high in the sales charts. An economical car was needed in 1956, but by the mid-60s the economy was booming and fuel economy wasn't at the top of everyone's shopping list. The Imp was larger than the Mini, something Rootes wanted so it drove like their larger cars, but it cost over 10% more and was only £6 cheaper than the larger Ford Anglia that had a bigger engine. A poll by the Observer newspaper showed that only 1 in 10 car buyers wanted rear-engined cars, so maybe as an admission customers weren't going to be placated by the Imp's front boot, the car got an opening rear window and a folding back seat that could be turned into a rear boot of sorts. The marketing material stretched a point by saying this 4-seater converted into a 2-seater station wagon. It also failed to mention that you'd have to lean over the engine to get your bags into this makeshift rear boot. The Mini and the Ford Anglia had the boot, where people expected it, at the back. Mike Parkes and Tim Fry's original goals had been for a car that could get to 60 miles an hour yet return 60 miles per gallon. The Imp's 42 horsepower engine could get to 75 miles an hour but only got 45 miles per gallon. It was well appointed with a modern linear speedometer. The press were complimentary about the car, praising the handling, gearbox and performance. They predicted a rosy future and expected the car maker to easily sell the expected 150,000 cars every year. There was a real sense of pride in Scotland for the first car produced there for over 3 decades, especially at Hillman dealers. The Imp would be exported as Hillman, Sunbeams and Singers, and parts were sent out for assembly across the globe. There was a hope it would sell well on the continent where rear-wheel drive cars were more popular, although also going out of fashion. In 1964, the US magazine American Rodding would try an audacious stunt in the days before the 55-mile-an-hour blanket speed limit, attempted to drive the Imp from New York to LA in just 50 hours. They made it in a shade over 48 hours with an amazing average speed of 62.5 miles an hour, with an average fuel economy of 35 miles per gallon, proving that the Coventry Climax Motorsports proven engine was more than up to the task, despite being driven for 2 days in August temperatures of over 40 degrees C. The Rootes US team produced the Lord and Lady Imp Special Editions, apparently the first cars tailored specifically for men or women. The Lord Imp had things a man needed in a car, like a ship-to-shore radio, marine compass, ship's bell, the normal things a man needs on the road. Being 1964, the lady's car would be the perfect present for a man to give to his wife. I'm quoting here. The Lady Imp comes complete with such totally feminine features as a hairdryer, princess mobile telephone, and cosmetic perfume console. It is richly upholstered in a bright and strikingly floral pattern. Understandably, it went down about as well as Honda's attempt at a car for women, the 2012 Fit She's. Zagato, the Italian coach building company, saw the Imp as something that they could produce and sell in Italy, with a little Italian styling, of course. They made a deal with Rootes to produce the car as the aluminium-bodied Zagato Zimp, shown at the 1964 Earls Court Motor Show. Austrian firm Steyr Puck tried their own version, the Farmobile, but neither car ever saw the light of day. Rootes' impish Canadian marketing team said the Imp was made in the Highlands of Scotland by clever elves. The truth wasn't quite so jolly. They were being made by disgruntled unionised Scots near the River Clyde. The wages at the Imp factory were the best in the area, but the workers were annoyed that they weren't being paid the same as the workers in Coventry. Management explained that the production rate needed to match Coventry before wages could rise, but the workers were having none of it. They claimed production delays stemmed from the parts, which had to come all the way up from Coventry. Strike action dogged the factory, with 3 different unions all vying for domination. Strikes would be called over trivial matters like a pie vending machine that stopped working. Unions felt the management actually engineered strikes when there was low demand for cars, or when there were strikes at parts manufacturers just so they didn't need to pay workers. There was a 3-way power struggle between the management, unions and workers, and every day that management had to focus on union issues was the day they couldn't be working on selling or improving the car. That would hit the bottom line and damage the reputation of the Linwood workers. There would certainly not be an expansion of the factory anytime soon. The Imp had been tested all over the world in a quest to make it reliable. It had been driven for weeks around Britain all day long, but it hadn't been driven down to the shops and then to pick up the kids and then left sitting in the rain. By failing to do these real-world tests, many problems were missed. To compound this, the new strike-ridden workforce who'd never built cars before were making poor quality cars, when they were being made at all. Soon customers were complaining of problems with the water pump, pneumatic throttle, the automatic choke, and panel gaps that were so big the car leaked like a sieve. It didn't help that engineering skills were a 320-mile train ride away in Coventry. Problems took time to fix, involving more test drives across the globe, and production was slowed by convoluted manufacturing processes. Engine blocks were produced in Scotland, sent to Coventry to be assembled, and then sent back to be installed. It was all very inefficient and costly. Bad news travels fast, and soon the motoring press was filled with imp reliability horror stories. Sales flagged and the workforce was put on a 4-day week. Plans to produce a larger version of the Imp, dubbed the Swallow, were put on ice, as was the sports car version, the Asp. Roots finances were feeling the pinch of the Linwood expansion and disappointing sales, so they were forced to sell a 30% stake to Detroit-based Chrysler. One way to help sales, though, was motorsports, and with an engine that had won many races, it seemed to be the next logical step. The Imp went rallying in 1964, and a Hillman Imp won the 1965 Dutch Tulip Rally. Imps would still be racing into the 1970s, dominating the British Saloon Car Championships. Roots would capitalise on this with Imp Sport models, rebadged in Australia as the Hillman Imp GT. It retained the 875cc engine, but with an increase to 55 horsepower, it now got to 90 miles an hour. As the advertising said, it was a grown-up answer to Scale Extric. With the major problems ironed out, Roots attempted to relaunch the Imp in 1965 as the Mark II. The pneumatic throttle and automatic choke had been replaced with more conventional and hopefully reliable components. It also got a larger 998cc engine. The Hillman Imp was asking for a second chance. But first impressions count, and 1965 sales were lower than 1964 sales. 1966 sales were lower than 1965. Rear-engine vans don't work well because the engine gets in the way of loading the cargo, but it didn't stop Roots making a van version as the Commer Imp van. As you might expect, it had a high floor, which meant a high roof to compensate. In 1967, a 4-seat estate appeared as the Hillman Husky. It was lighter, which meant it was a little faster than the Imp Saloon, but you had to look twice to see if there was a tiny coffin in the back. It looked a bit like a hearse. Maybe a little more fun was to be had with the Sunbeam Imp Californian. It got a coupe look with a lower roofline, but used a regular Imp engine. The Sunbeam Stiletto offered more excitement. It wasn't named after the high heel shoe though, but a smaller version of a rapier sword. It was a clever play on words for the larger Sunbeam rapier. The 4 headlights showed it meant business, and it used the Imp Sport's more powerful engine to get it to 90 miles an hour. Roots needed more money to solve its problems, so sold a controlling stake to Chrysler in 1967. The union problems were now Detroit's to solve, but union problems continued. There was a hope an injection of cash could produce a new and improved Imp, but Chrysler didn't see much of a future in the low-cost, low-margin and out-of-date rear-engined Imp. They did launch an update that was already in development though, to keep the car at least selling in modest numbers. The instrument panel was swapped out for more conventional dials, and the seats and fabrics were all new. But the update failed to turn sales around. Customers were buying the Austin 1100 and 1300 and the new Ford Escort. But that didn't stop some from dreaming about what could be done with this low-slung chassis. In 1968, 2 brothers, Dennis and Peter Adams, dreamt up the Probe 15 sports car using the Imp chassis and original engine, all in a futuristic package that was light years from the Imp's conservative shape. Being lighter, it reportedly went over 100 miles an hour. 3 were made and the team worked on getting it launched, but hit problems. It resurfaced again as the 1973 Centaur GT, and 52 space-age creations were built for 52 lucky customers. Roots, or Chrysler UK as they were now known, looked at one more use for the Imp. The Mini Moke had sold modestly well in the 1960s, so the Gilly prototype was duly created. But with Chrysler looking for high-volume wins like the Hillman Avenger, the the Gilly never moved beyond a prototype. The Imp limped along until the mid-70s, but its days were numbered. Production was set to end, and the problematic Linwood factory closed after just over 10 years. Although relations with the Linwood factory had never been great, in 1975 Chrysler decided to celebrate the Imp's Scottish roots with the Hillman Imp Caledonian Special Edition, a sort of closeout special featuring all the best bits that they could think to add. It had 2, count them, door mirrors, a heated rear windscreen, a radio, sports wheels and a natty Caledonian seat fabric. Chrysler focused on the car's fuel economy now a second fuel crisis had gripped the country. It's ironic that while the car would have sold like hotcakes in 1956, in 1973 and 74 at the height of the fuel crisis, sales barely ticked upwards. British Leyland went bankrupt, leading to a government takeover to preserve jobs. With Chrysler UK in a bad way, they threatened to close the entire operation unless the UK government gave them a handout as well. The government agreed, but there were strings attached. The Linwood factory would have to stay open to preserve jobs. Chrysler UK was thrown into chaos to come up with a replacement for the Imp. Thankfully, they had a 3-door hatchback version of the Hillman Avenger in the planning stage. It was rushed to market as the Chrysler Sunbeam to replace Imp production when it ended in 1976. If you want to learn more about the Sunbeam, I talk about it in the Hillman Avenger video and there's a link above. In 1963, there were hopes of selling 150,000 Imps every year. UK sales never got close, and although I don't have figures for exports, there were only 16% of total sales, so if you overlay these estimates, it doesn't make the sales figures look much better in any case. The Imp was a car that should have taken less than 8 years to get to production. Root should have used the mini launch as a reset to future-proof it, and they should have listened to their test engineers who were telling them that the car wasn't ready. You only get one chance to make a first impression. This was a car rushed to market, built by workers new to car manufacture who were constantly stopping the production line, creating more quality problems. It shouldn't have been a surprise that the Imp's first impression wasn't good, and that's a crying shame for both Roots, the Scottish workers, and the British car industry. Sorry to leave you on a bit of a downer there, but if you want to hear more tales of woe with some extra bits, then look at the optional extra video about the Hillman Imp on the right. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.